3 days before Christmas. I was standing in my kitchen wrapping a dark green scarf for a man I had never met. I had chosen it carefully from a little shop in Gloucester, because Daniel once told me green reminded him of the sea before a storm. I remember smiling at that. He had a way of making ordinary things sound thoughtful. The paper kept folding unevenly beneath my fingers. I was nervous. Not frightened. Not then. Excited. In the hallway, beside the front door, stood a small navy suitcase. I had packed 2 warm jumpers, walking shoes, a new night dress I felt slightly foolish for buying, and a framed photograph of Peter. I had nearly taken the photograph out 3 times. Peter had been my husband for 41 years. Bringing him with me to meet another man felt wrong somehow. Even though Daniel had been the one to suggest it. Bring him if it comforts you, he had said. Love does not vanish because life continues. Those words had stayed with me. On the kitchen table lay 2 train tickets and a printed booking confirmation for a cottage near St. Ives. The photograph showed a stone fireplace, a small Christmas tree, and 2 armchairs facing the window. Daniel had promised to collect me from Truro Station the following morning. For weeks, we had spoken about that moment. He would be waiting near the ticket barrier in a dark coat. I would recognize him at once. We would be nervous for perhaps 5 minutes, he said. And then it would feel as though we had known each other for years. My phone was propped against the sugar bowl. His latest message still glowed on the screen. 1 more night. My darling. Then neither of us will ever spend Christmas alone again. I read it twice. Then I placed a bottle of wine into a gold gift bag and wondered whether I should add a card. That was when someone knocked loudly at the front door. 3 firm knocks. I assumed it was a delivery. I wiped my hands on a tea towel and walked into the hall, stepping around the suitcase. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing on the path. For a moment, none of us spoke. The older officer looked at me. Mrs. Margaret Ellis. Yes. The second officer glanced past my shoulder. His eyes settled briefly on the suitcase. Something in his expression made my stomach tighten. May we come in? I gripped the edge of the door. What is this about? The older officer spoke carefully. Mrs. Ellis. Have you recently transferred money to a man named Daniel Whitmore? The hallway seemed to tilt beneath me. I gave a small laugh because the question sounded so absurd. There must be some mistake. I'm afraid we don't believe there is. Daniel isn't involved in anything criminal. Neither officer replied. He's a marine engineer. I continued. He's working in Northern Europe. He's coming home tomorrow. The younger officer lowered his voice. How much money have you sent him? That's private. Mrs. Ellis. He is not a stranger. My voice rose before I could stop it. He knows my husband's name. He knows my daughter's birthday. He knows where Peter and I spent our honeymoon. We speak every night. The officers exchanged a glance. I hated that glance. It felt like pity. The older one stepped slightly closer. Mrs. Ellis. We believe the man you are planning to meet tomorrow does not exist. For several seconds, I heard nothing. Not the television in the sitting room. Not the rain against the window. Not even my own breathing. Behind me. My suitcase waited by the door. The scarf lay half-wrapped on the kitchen table. My phone Dundee book with Daniel's name. I held the doorframe to steady myself. Then I looked at the officers and asked the only question that mattered. Then who have I been speaking to every night for the last 7 months? 4 years earlier. Before Daniel's name had ever appeared on my phone, Peter died after a short illness that none of us had been prepared for. One spring morning he was complaining that I had made the tea too weak. 6 weeks later, I was sitting beside a hospital bed listening to a machine breathe more steadily than he could. We had been married for 41 years. That sounds like a long time when you say it aloud. But when it ends, it feels astonishingly brief. Our life had never been glamorous. It was built from ordinary things. Radio 4 at breakfast. Saturday shopping in Gloucester. Peter pretending not to notice when I put the heating on before October. Christmas cards spread across the dining table. because he insisted on writing a proper message in every one. Each summer, we went to Cornwall. Sometimes St. Ives. Sometimes Falmouth. Sometimes a small village where nothing seemed to happen after 6 in the evening. Peter liked it that way. After he died, the silence in our bungalow became almost physical. It was there when I woke. It followed me from room to room. It sat opposite me at the kitchen table. For nearly a year, I kept his slippers beneath the bed. I never touched them. I simply needed to know they were there. At first, I continued cooking for 2. I would peel too many potatoes, fill 2 plates, then stop when I realized what I had done. Eventually, I began freezing half the meal. My freezer became full of portions I did not particularly want. Made for someone who was never coming home. Claire rang often in those early months. Mum, are you eating properly? Yes. Love, are you sleeping? More or less. Do you want me to come up? No. You've got enough on. That became my standard answer. I did not want to become another task between her work, the school run, and 2 teenagers who always seemed to need taking somewhere. She had her own life. Peter and I had raised her to have one. So I told her I was managing well. At 68, my days were safe, organized and almost painfully similar. Twice a week, I volunteered at a charity shop in town. I sorted donated books, steamed clothes, and smiled at customers who rarely looked at my name badge. On Thursdays, I went to the church coffee morning. People were kind. They asked how I was. I said, keeping busy. Nobody ever asked what happened when I stopped. I collected my prescriptions from the same chemist, bought single portions from the local supermarket, and watched quiz programs in the evening. Sometimes I knew every answer. Sometimes I realized 20 minutes had passed and I had not heard a single question. There were weekends when I did not speak aloud from Friday afternoon until Claire rang on Sunday. She always called, but there was usually noise behind her. A cupboard closing, someone asking where their trainers were, her husband calling from another room. I'll ring you properly later. Mom, that's all right. Are you sure? Of course. I refused nearly every invitation to Bristol. I told myself the drive was tiring, that I preferred my own bed, that I did not want to interfere. The truth was less dignified. I was afraid of becoming the elderly mother everyone had to include. I used to say, being alone isn't the same as being lonely. Eventually, I began leaving the television on through the night because the voices made the bungalow feel occupied. The previous Christmas had been the worst. Claire's family spent Christmas Day with her husband's parents. I insisted I did not mind. I could do with a peaceful one. I said. I heated a supermarket turkey dinner and watched Peter's favorite film. At midnight, I stood in the dark kitchen with my hand resting on the worktop. No one had touched me all day. Not a hug. Not a hand on my shoulder. Nothing. Several months later, my friend Sheila mentioned a companionship website for older people. Absolutely not. I told her, you might meet someone nice. I might meet a murderer. She laughed. I did not. Online dating seemed undignified. Dangerous. The sort of thing sensible women avoided. Then, one rainy Sunday evening, I opened the website. I used a photograph Claire had taken at Weston-super-Mare and wrote, widowed. Retired. I fond of books, coastal walks, and people who still believe kindness matters. For nearly a week, nothing happened. Then a message arrived from a silver-haired man standing beside the sea. It did not say I was beautiful. It did not call me darling. It simply asked, I noticed Cornwall in your list of favorite places. Did it become special before or after you were married? I stared at those words for 10 minutes before replying. Why did one question from a stranger feel more personal than anything I had heard in years? His name like 2 and 11. He told me. Was Daniel Whitmore. He was 66. Divorced. And originally from Dartmouth. Most of his working life had been spent maintaining navigation systems on commercial ships. These days, he said. He only accepted short consultancy contracts. One final job. He wrote. Then I'm retiring properly. He had a grown son in Canada. Though they were not close, I understood that kind of distance more than I wanted to admit. Claire lived only in Bristol. But some weeks it still felt as though there were oceans between us. Not because she did not care. Because life had filled every corner of her day. Daniel seemed to understand that we were both older, both alone, both past the age of wanting excitement for its own sake. What we missed, we said, was ordinary companionship. Someone to ask whether the milk had run out. Someone to complain about the weather with. Someone who would notice if you had gone quiet. He did not rush me. That was one of the first things I trusted. Every morning. Usually at about 7:15. A message appeared. Take an umbrella. Gloucester looks wet today. Or, have you remembered your charity shop shift? Once. After I had spoken about Peter for longer than I meant to, Daniel wrote, Peter sounds like the sort of man I would have liked. I read that sentence several times. Most people became uncomfortable when I mentioned my husband. They would lower their eyes or change the subject, as though grief were something impolite. Daniel asked questions. What did Peter teach me about marriage? What had made him laugh? Where had we spent our happiest holiday? When I apologized for speaking about him too often, Daniel replied, 41 years does not disappear because someone new says hello. Something inside me loosened. Until then, I had believed that opening the door to anyone new meant closing it on Peter. Daniel made it seem possible to carry both. After 2 weeks, he suggested we move to WhatsApp because the dating website was unreliable. I hesitated, and then I told myself it was only another way of talking. Soon we were exchanging photographs. He sent one of himself beside a harbor. Silver hair blown by the wind. Another showed him holding a mug on what looked like the deck of a ship. I sent pictures of my garden, my Sunday dinner, and the cat asleep on Peter's old chair. He never sent a photograph at the exact moment I asked for one. At the time, I barely noticed. There was always a reason. He was working. The signal was poor. The vessel's security rules were strict. Our first phone call lasted 43 minutes. I know because I looked at the screen afterwards. His voice was calm and British. Though every so often he used a phrase that sounded slightly unusual, I assumed it came from years spent abroad. He did not dominate the conversation. He listened. Really listened. Before we ended the call, he said quietly, I had forgotten what it felt like to look forward to tomorrow. I lay awake smiling that night. Within a month, I had changed in small ways. I began wearing lipstick at home. I bought new pajamas. I cooked proper meals so I could photograph them for him. I walked farther each afternoon because Daniel said the fresh air was good for my spirits. Most mornings, I checked my phone before opening the curtains. Claire noticed. You sound brighter? Mum, I've made a friend. A man. I laughed too quickly. Just a friend. I did not tell her he had already called me beautiful. 6 weeks after we met online, Daniel said his contract would bring him back to England. Cheltenham, he suggested. Coffee somewhere quiet. The thought made me nervous, but happy. I chose a blues. Changed my mind. Then chose another. 2 days before we were meant to meet. He rang. His contract had been extended. There had been a technical problem aboard the vessel. He sounded genuinely disappointed. Please don't think I'm avoiding you, he said. I'm trying to finish this chapter so I can begin the next one properly. I told him I understood, and I did. Or perhaps I simply wanted to. After we ended the call, I placed the unworn blouse back in the wardrobe. Was the cancelled meeting nothing more than bad luck, or the first moment I should have walked away? After the cancelled meeting, I expected the disappointment between us to create some distance. Instead, Daniel drew closer. Over the next 3 months, he became part of the shape of every day. He messaged before breakfast. He rang while I had afternoon tea. Most evenings, I heard his voice before I went to bed. It was not the grand things he asked about that moved me. It was the ordinary ones. What does Peter's old shed smell like? Wood shavings and damp soil. I told him. And the conservatory when it rains? Like dust and wet glass. Which side of the bed do you sleep on? The left. He paused. Still. Yes. He never laughed. He asked what I missed most about being married. Not Peter in general. The small parts. I told him I missed having someone say, "I'm going upstairs." As though the information mattered. I missed hearing another person moving about in the kitchen. I missed being expected home. Daniel listened so carefully that I sometimes forgot we had never shared the same room. Gradually, our conversations turned towards the future. He did not talk about expensive holidays or a different life. He spoke about modest things. A rented cottage near the coast. National Trust houses on quiet weekdays. Sunday newspapers spread across the table. Rosemary and lavender planted outside a back door. Slow train journeys where neither of us needed to hurry. One evening, he asked where I would spend Christmas if I could choose anywhere. Cornwall. I said without thinking. Peter and I had always meant to go back there in winter. He had promised we would do it after retirement. But illness came first. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Perhaps Cornwall is waiting for you." Not behind you. The words stayed with me. A few days later, he sent photographs of a cottage near St. Ives. There was a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen and 2 armchairs beside a Christmas tree. From the upstairs window, you could see a narrow harbor. 8 nights. He said, "Just us. Somewhere peaceful." I stared at the photographs for nearly an hour. It felt extravagant, also impossible. Then Daniel began describing it. Christmas Eve at a village church. Fish and chips by the harbor. 1 meaningful present each. No pressure to pretend the past had not happened. "Bring Peter's photograph," he said. "If that would make you comfortable." That decided it for me. A jealous man would not have said that. A selfish man would not have made space for a dead husband. I paid the deposit. Daniel explained that his company blocked personal transactions while he was offshore. But he would pay his half once the contract ended. The amount was not large enough to worry me. The confirmation email looked genuine. For the first time in years, Christmas became something I wanted to arrive. Without noticing, I began arranging my life around Daniel. I missed a church lunch because he had promised to call. I saw less of Sheila. When Claire asked what I had been doing, I answered vaguely. I knew she would worry. Daniel never told me to keep secrets from her. Not directly. He only said, "Children sometimes struggle to accept that their parents still have emotional lives. Another time, Claire may fear she is being replaced. Then, let us keep this between us until we've met. Some things deserve protection." I heard privacy in those words. Not secrecy. Claire found out by accident. She arrived one afternoon without warning and saw Daniel's photograph open on my tablet. "Who's that?" I tried to close the screen. "No one." "Mum." So I told her. Not everything. Enough. She listened quietly. But I saw the caution in her face. "Have you video called? The signal aboard the vessel is poor." "What company does he work for?" "He has told me." I can't remember the name. Claire suggested doing a reverse image search. Something in me hardened. "I'm not Senela." "I didn't say you were." "You're treating me as if I can't make my own decisions." "I'm trying to keep you safe." I stood up. "You may be comfortable with me being alone." "Claire." "I'm not." Her face changed. I regretted it immediately. But neither of us took the words back. After she left, Daniel rang. I told him everything. "I would never ask you to choose between us," he said gently. Yet by the end of the conversation, I felt that only he understood me. A week later, Daniel told me he loved me. I could not answer. He did not pressure me. He simply said goodnight. 3 evenings later, the power went out during heavy rain. I sat beneath a blanket with the phone pressed to my ear. In the darkness, I whispered, "I think I love you too." Daniel became completely silent. Then, he said, "You have no idea what that means to me." At the time, I believed I had finally found a second chance. I did not yet understand that Daniel had spent months learning exactly which words I needed to hear. The first inconsistency was so small that I almost felt foolish for noticing it. Daniel told me he was in Rotterdam later that same evening. While we were speaking, he mentioned how late it was where he was and said he had been awake since before dawn. The time he described did not fit. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, trying to work it out. Perhaps the vessel had moved. Perhaps I had misunderstood. Before I could ask, he changed the subject and wanted to know whether I had decided what to wear on Christmas Eve. The doubt slipped away. A few days later, he sent me a photograph supposedly taken that morning. He was standing near a harbor beneath a bright blue sky. The trees behind him were thick with green leaves, and someone in the distance appeared to be wearing shorts. It was late November. Looks warm. I wrote. He replied almost immediately. Old photograph. Darling. Sent the wrong one. That made sense. At least, I told myself it did. Then, during one call, he called me Marjorie. Only once. The word came out quickly. Almost swallowed. What did you say? Nothing. You called me Marjorie. There was a pause. An old colleague. I'm exhausted. Maggie. I'm sorry. He sounded embarrassed. I ended up reassuring him. The video calls troubled me more. By then, we had been speaking for months, and I wanted to see his face moving while he spoke. Daniel always agreed. That was what made the excuses seem believable. He never said no. The first time, the screen remained black, while his voice came through faintly. The second time, the sound broke apart, and the call ended. Another evening. He told me the company's security system blocked video connections from the vessel. Once, for perhaps 2 seconds, I saw part of a man's forehead in a dark room. Then the picture froze. Daniel was upset afterwards. I wanted our first proper sight of each other to be better than that. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Again, I found myself comforting him. His messages began changing too. Some were polished and thoughtful, written exactly as I expected Daniel to write. Others contained strange grammar, missing words, phrases he had never used before. One morning he asked how my hospital appointment had gone. I had not had one. When I reminded him, he said he had confused it with a conversation about Sheila. I accepted that. People forget things. I forgot things. That was what I kept telling myself. Then I telephoned the owner of the cottage near St. Ives. I only wanted to confirm the arrival details. Yes. Mrs. Ellis, the woman said. The reservation is secure. We've received the deposit. And the rest? The balance is due in 2 weeks. Daniel had not paid his half. When I asked him about it that evening, he sighed. My final payment has been delayed. For how long? A few days. Perhaps a week. The cottage owner needs the money soon. I know. I'll settle everything before Christmas. His voice remained calm. I wanted to believe him. The following Tuesday, I went into my local bank to move money from my savings account into my current account for the holiday. A staff member named Aisha helped me. She had served me several times before and remembered that I volunteered at the charity shop. As she entered the details, she glanced at me. Are you all right? Mrs. Ellis. Perfectly. You seem a little nervous. I'm going away for Christmas. That sounds lovely. She paused. Has anyone asked you to move this money? Heat rose into my face. No. I only ask because we're seeing more cases of romance fraud. It often starts with small, believable requests. I gave a short laugh. He has never asked me for money. The words came out too quickly. Aisha looked at me for a moment, then completed the transfer. That evening, Claire sent me a screenshot. She had reverse-searched Daniel's photograph without telling me. The same face appeared on a foreign language website. The man was identified as a retired television presenter from New Zealand. My hands went cold. I forwarded the image to Daniel. He rang at once. This again? What do you mean? My photographs have been stolen before. It happens because I've worked internationally. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want this ugliness touching us. He sounded wounded. After everything I've shared with you. It hurts that your daughter can reduce me to an internet search. By the end of the call, I felt ashamed for doubting him. I deleted Claire's message. Then I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at Daniel's photograph. The question was no longer whether Claire might be right. It was why I was more frightened of losing him than of discovering that she was 5 weeks before Christmas. Daniel called much later than usual. It was nearly 11:30. I had already switched off the television and was carrying my mug to the kitchen when his name appeared on the screen. I answered at once. Daniel. For several seconds. He said nothing. All I could hear was his breathing. What's happened? There's been a problem. His voice sounded strained, as though he were trying very hard to remain calm. What sort of problem? A piece of navigation equipment was damaged during transport. I signed for the delivery. So they're holding me responsible until the insurance position is settled. I sat down at the kitchen table. Can they do that? Apparently. He gave a tired laugh. They've withheld my passport and final payment. That doesn't sound legal. It's complicated offshore. The rules are different. I waited for him to continue. He said nothing about money. Instead, he apologized. I shouldn't be telling you this. Why not? Because it isn't your burden. You sound frightened. I'm not frightened. There was a pause. I'm just trying to think. How much is involved? No. Maggie. How much? I am not asking you. I know. He sighed. The temporary insurance excess is £4,800. Only for 48 hours. Once the claim clears, it comes straight back. I remember looking towards Peter's photograph on the dresser. Daniel still had not actually asked. That mattered to me. I could help. I said, no. I have savings. Absolutely not. It would only be temporary. I won't allow you to risk your money because of my mistake. His refusal reassured me more than any document could have done. I insisted. Eventually, he accepted with such reluctance that I felt almost guilty for forcing the help upon him. The bank details arrived the following morning. The account was not in Daniel's name. It belonged to a woman I had never heard of. When I questioned it, he explained that all company payments had to pass through a licensed shipping agent. It's standard procedure, he said. I know it looks odd from the outside. At the bank, Aisha recognized me immediately. When I told her I wanted to send £4. Babe. She asked who the recipient was. A contractor. What is the payment for? Repairs. Home repairs. I hesitated. Yes. The lie came more easily than I expected. She studied the account details. Did someone tell you what to say to us? No. Mrs. Ellis. We need to be certain you're not being pressured. I am not being pressured. The transfer was held for additional checks. When I told Daniel, I expected him to be angry. He was not. He only said, I hate that this is touching your life. It will be sorted tomorrow. I never wanted you worrying about money. I'm not. Once I'm home, you will never have to worry about it again. That sentence soothed me. The following afternoon, the transfer went through. 2 days later, Daniel told me the problem was nearly resolved. Then, just before breakfast, another message arrived. Customs authorities had frozen the equipment. A further security payment was required before it could be released. £9,200. This time, I did not answer immediately. When Daniel rang, I said, that is a great deal of money. I know. You said the first payment would solve it. I believed it would. He sent official-looking documents with maritime logos, reference numbers and signatures. Then came an image of his passport. The photograph matched the man I knew. I stared at it until my doubt began to feel unreasonable. My final payment is more than £70,000, he said. Every penny will be returned. I still hesitated. Then his voice lowered. Without this, I may not be home for Christmas. Suddenly, it was not merely a transfer, it was the cottage, the train tickets, the scarf, the Christmas neither of us would ever spend alone again. I need time, I said. Of course. His silence lasted several seconds. Then he whispered, I should never have allowed myself to believe happiness was possible. The words struck exactly where he meant them to. It felt as though I were abandoning him at the final obstacle. The first bank refused the payment, so I used another account. Part of the money came from what Peter had left me. That evening, I sat beside his photograph. I'm not giving your money away, I said quietly. I'm using it to begin living again. The bungalow gave no answer. For the first time, even I did not believe the words. Had I paid to bring Daniel home? Or handed a stranger? The savings Peter had spent his life building. Claire knew something was wrong before I told her. During our Sunday call, I answered questions too quickly and forgot what she had said only moments earlier. Mum, are you listening? Yes. Of course. What did I just tell you? I looked at the silent television. Something about the children. She sighed. I'm coming up. There's no need. I'll be there this evening. She arrived from Bristol shortly after 7. Still wearing the coat she had driven in. I had made tea, though neither of us touched it. For several minutes, she spoke about ordinary things. Her work, the grandchildren, Christmas shopping. Then she looked directly at me. What has happened with Daniel? Nothing. Mum. I folded my hands in my lap. He has had a temporary financial difficulty. Claire went completely still. What does that mean? It is being resolved. How much have you sent him? I looked away. Mum. How much? When I finally told her, the color drained from her face. £14,000. It is a loan. To a man you have never met. You don't understand the situation. No. I understand it perfectly. The sharpness in her voice made me feel small. Judged. I knew you would react like this. How else am I supposed to react? He is coming home. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Show me the documents. I did not want to, but I also wanted to prove her wrong. I brought the printed pages from the drawer and placed them on the table. She read them slowly. Her expression changed almost at once. This font is different here. That proves nothing. And this word is misspelt. People make mistakes. She turned to the next page. This company registration number belongs to a business in Manchester that closed years ago. How would you know? I searched it. Then she pointed at the banking information. There are 2 different surnames. I snatched the papers back. You came here determined to find something wrong. I came because I am frightened. For me or for my money? Claire stared at me. Both. Because this man is stealing from you. You don't know him. Her answer came quietly. Neither do you. The words struck harder than if she had shouted. I stood up. You think I am incapable of knowing when someone cares about me? No. You think because I'm older? Every decision I make has to be checked. I think a man who loves you should be willing to show his face. He works on a vessel. Mum? Dad would never have trusted this. I slapped my hand against the table. Your father is dead. Daniel is here? The room fell silent. Claire's eyes filled with tears. The moment the words left me, I wanted them back, but pride held me in place. She sat down slowly. This isn't only about the money, she said. When the truth arrives, I'm frightened it will destroy you. There is no truth to arrive. Claire took out her phone. I'm calling the police non-emergency number and action fraud. No. Mum. I said no. If he is genuine, there is nothing to fear. He will feel betrayed. Claire looked at me in disbelief. You are protecting his feelings while he empties your accounts. I told Daniel about the argument as soon as she left the room. For the first time, His gentleness slipped. Claire is trying to sabotage us. She thinks she is helping. She is frightened of losing control. That isn't fair. Does she know how much money you still have? The question chilled me. Why would you ask that? I only mean that adult children sometimes worry about inheritance when a widowed parent finds love. I rejected the idea, yet once he had planted it, I could not entirely remove it. 2 days later, Daniel asked for another £17,000. He said he had secured a flight but needed the money to release his passport and settle the final liability. I can't. I told him, then the cottage will be lost. I have already sent too much. He said nothing for a long time. Then a voice message arrived. He sounded as though he were crying. I thought this Christmas would prove we had survived everything. I listened to it 3 times. I began considering the ISA Peter and I had built over years. There was also a small life insurance reserve I had promised never to touch. Claire contacted my bank before I could decide. She sent them the documents and reported suspected coercion. When I attempted the transfer, it failed. I rang the bank. Furious. They explained that a temporary safeguarding restriction had been placed on large payments. I knew immediately who had done it. Claire came back to the bungalow that evening. How dare you? Mum. Please. You have humiliated me. I am trying to stop you losing everything. You are treating me like a child. She stood by the front door, crying. I would rather have you hate me now than bury you under this shame later. Then she left. I did hate her in that moment. Or perhaps I hated the fear she had forced me to see. Daniel called later. His voice was warm again. I have found another solution. What solution? I'm coming home without the money. I hardly dared breathe. You are. I've confirmed everything. We will still have Cornwall. He gave me exact travel plans. The train, the time, the place he would collect me. I packed my suitcase. I bought the dark green scarf. And when Claire rang, I let the phone continue ringing until it stopped. If Daniel arrived for Christmas, I would prove everyone wrong. But if he did not, I had no idea whether Claire would still be there when I finally understood why. The officers stepped into the hallway while I remained beside the open door. Rain had darkened the shoulders of their coats. One of them was a woman, perhaps in her 40s, with a calm face and a folder tucked beneath her arm. The other officer looked younger. He kept glancing towards the suitcase as though it told him more than I had. May we sit down? Mrs. Ellis, the woman asked. I did not want them in my house. I wanted them to leave so I could ring Daniel and hear him explain everything. Still, I led them into the sitting room. The cottage confirmation lay on the coffee table beside my train tickets. The woman noticed them but said nothing. We're investigating a number of fraudulent payments. She began. 2 of the accounts involved received money from you. That does not make Daniel a criminal. No. But the accounts are connected to an organized romance fraud network. I shook my head. You're wrong. The younger officer opened the folder. The shipping company Daniel gave you does not exist. He works through contractors. The passport image he sent is forged. I felt my hands tighten around one another. No. The documents were copied from genuine maritime organizations. The logos are real. The names and payment instructions are not. They showed me the account that had received the first transfer. It belonged to a woman in England. For one brief moment, relief rushed through me. There. You see, a shipping agent. The officer's expression softened. She is a vulnerable person whose account was being used to move stolen money. We do not believe she understood the full purpose. The room seemed too warm. I stood and opened the window. Though cold air immediately swept inside, then the woman placed a photograph on the table. It was Daniel. The silver hair, the gentle smile, the sea behind him. I reached for it. Where did you get this? This man lives in New Zealand. He is a retired television presenter. His photographs have been used in frauds before. The screenshot Claire had sent flashed through my mind. I had deleted it. Not because it was unconvincing, because it frightened me. He told me his photographs had been stolen. I said. The officer nodded. That is a common explanation. I sat down again. You don't understand. He knows things no one else knows. Things you told him. I could not answer. They asked me to open WhatsApp. My fingers trembled so badly that I entered the wrong code twice. The woman read several messages, then took out printed pages from the folder. She placed them beside my phone. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the words, 41 years does not disappear because someone new says hello. My sentence. Our sentence. Except it had been sent to another woman. Another page contained, some things deserve protection. Then, I had forgotten what it felt like to look forward to tomorrow. The same words, the same pauses, the same tenderness, used again and again. One victim had been called Susan, another, Jean, another, Patricia. The officer explained that several people may have been answering me at different times. That was why the grammar changed. Why Daniel forgot conversations. Why he called me Marjorie. Why his voice sometimes sounded warmer and sometimes strangely flat. I may not have been speaking to one man at all. I may have been speaking to a room full of strangers, sharing notes about my grief. I looked towards the hallway. The suitcase was still visible from where I sat. The cottage is real. I whispered. Yes. The officer said. He found it. He encouraged you to book it. But why? Because a real booking makes a false future feel possible. The woman spoke gently. They did not only take your money. Mrs. Ellis. They built a place in your mind and persuaded you to live there. At that exact moment, my phone rang. Daniel. His name filled the screen. The officers exchanged a glance. Answer it. The woman said. Do not tell him we're here. I pressed the phone to my ear. Maggie. My darling. His voice was warm, familiar. For one terrible second. Relief returned. I'm preparing to travel. He said. There is only one final airport fee. My eyes closed. How much? 6,500 pounds. The room went still. I looked at the green scarf on the kitchen table. What color scarf did I buy you? He hesitated. You told me not to spoil the surprise. I told you twice. Another pause. Blue. The scarf was green. I swallowed. What was Peter's favorite Christmas film? He laughed nervously. Maggie. Why are you doing this? What film? He gave the wrong answer. Then his voice sharpened. Claire has poisoned your mind. I looked at the officers. What is my name? Margaret. No. Silence. You always called me Maggie. The warmth vanished completely. When he spoke again, the voice sounded colder than any I had heard from him before. Send the money. Or you lose everything. I looked at the tickets. The suitcase. Peter's photograph packed between my jumpers. I already have. I said. Then I ended the call. After the officers left, I sat down on the hallway floor. I did not cry. Not at first. I opened the gift paper and took out the scarf. The wool was soft against my hands. I pressed it to my face. That was when the tears came. Not because Daniel was gone. Daniel had never been there. I cried for the cottage. For the train journey. For Christmas Eve, in the little church. For the man waiting at Truro station in a dark coat. I cried for the future they had taught me to see so clearly that losing it felt like bereavement. And as I sat beside the packed suitcase, one question frightened me more than all the others. How could I report a man who had never existed, when part of me still missed him? For 2 days after the police visit, I barely moved from the bungalow. The suitcase remained in the hallway. The train tickets stayed on the table. I left Daniel's green scarf folded beside them because I could not decide whether to throw it away or hide it somewhere. I would never have to see it again. Claire rang repeatedly. I watched her name appear on the screen and disappear. Each time, I told myself I would answer the next call. I never did. It was easier to sit in silence than to hear kindness from the daughter I had accused of wanting my money. On the third morning, the female officer returned with a colleague from the financial investigation team. They asked for my phone. bank statements, transfer receipts, emails, and every document Daniel had sent. I felt exposed handing them over. The messages were not merely evidence. They were mornings in my kitchen, evenings beneath a blanket, the first time someone had called me beautiful in years. As the officer copied them, I stared at the floor. Will I get the money back? She did not offer false hope. We may be able to recover some of the second payment. It had not fully cleared when the accounts were flagged. And the first, I'm sorry. Most of it was gone. Part of me had expected those words. They still landed heavily. Over the following weeks, investigators traced the payments through several accounts. Some belonged to people who knowingly moved money. Others had been manipulated themselves. A number of UK-based facilitators were arrested for laundering funds and providing bank details to the network. The people who had actually spoken to me were believed to be overseas. No one could promise they would ever be identified. Justice, I discovered, was not a door opening to reveal one villain. It was paperwork, frozen accounts, interviews, partial answers. The bank eventually recovered part of the second transfer. It was not enough to repair the damage. But it meant Peter's savings had not vanished entirely. The police asked me to provide a formal victim impact statement. I refused at first. What difference will it make? It helps the court understand what was taken beyond the money. I almost laughed. How could I explain that? How could I put into official language that I no longer trusted the sound of my own telephone? That I woke at 7:15 expecting a message? That Peter's memories now felt tangled with a stranger's lies? That I had begun to believe love after 60 was something foolish women deserved to be punished for wanting Dane? Claire came to see me that evening. She did not say she had been right. She sat beside me and waited. I can't write the statement. I said, why? Because it makes me sound ridiculous. Claire turned towards me. Shame belongs to the people who studied your grief and sold it back to you. I looked at her. For the first time since the argument, I let her take my hand. The following day, I wrote everything. I described the sleepless nights, the secrecy, the way I stopped answering Claire, the moment I used Peter's money, the suitcase waiting by the door. The statement became part of the prosecution against one of the men who had helped move the funds. I never saw the people who wrote Daniel's messages, but my words helped prove that the crime was not simply a bank transfer. Months later, I agreed to speak anonymously at a fraud awareness meeting in Gloucester. There were about 30 people in the room. Most were near my age. I had prepared notes. But when I stood, I could not read them. So I told the truth. I was not tricked because I was stupid. I said, I was tricked because someone was patient with my loneliness. A woman in the second row began to cry. Afterwards, she approached me near the tea table. She had been sending money to a man online. He was stranded abroad. His passport had been withheld. He needed one final payment. The words were so familiar that my hands went cold. Together, we rang her bank. The transfer was stopped before it left her account. Driving home that afternoon, I understood something I had not understood before. The network might never return all my money. The person behind Daniel might never face me. But they no longer owned my silence. What had humiliated me could now protect someone else. Still, in the quiet of my own home, forgiveness remained harder. I could condemn the criminals. I could thank Claire. I could warn strangers. But the person I was angriest with was still the woman who had sat in that kitchen and believed every promise. How was I supposed to forgive her when she had been me? 1 year later, I returned to Cornwall. Not with Daniel. Not with the man I had imagined waiting for me at Truro Station. I rented a smaller cottage near Falmouth for 4 nights. And Claire came with her husband and the children. The cottage was not the one from the photographs. There was no stone fireplace, no perfect harbor view, and no Christmas tree arranged beside 2 matching armchairs. There was a narrow kitchen, a temperamental shower, and a front door that rattled whenever the wind came in from the sea. It was real. That mattered more than perfection. On Christmas Eve, we walked along the harbor beneath a gray sky. The rain was light but persistent. The sort that settled on your coat rather than falling properly. The grandchildren complained about the cold until Claire bought them hot chocolate from a cafe near the quay. I walked a little behind them. Around my neck was the dark green scarf I had once wrapped for Daniel. Claire noticed it. Her eyes rested on it for a moment. But she said nothing. Lauder. When we were back at the cottage and everyone else had gone upstairs, she found me standing by the kitchen window. "You wore the scarf," she said quietly. "Yes. I thought you might have thrown it away." I nearly did. I ran my fingers over the wool, then I realized I paid for it. I chose it. He doesn't get to own that as well. Claire looked down at her mug. For a while, neither of us spoke. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Outside, rain tapped against the glass. "I'm sorry," I said. She looked up. "For what?" "For what I said about your father." My throat tightened. "For suggesting you only cared about the money." "For refusing your calls." "For making you feel as though loving me was an insult." Claire put her mug down. "I'm sorry too. You tried to save me." "Yes. But I should have listened before there was something to save you from." I frowned. She continued carefully. "After Dad died, I kept asking whether you were all right. You kept saying yes. And I accepted it because it was easier. I invited you to Bristol. But I didn't really ask what your days felt like. You had your own family. That doesn't mean you stopped needing one." The words might once have made me defensive. That evening, they simply made me sad. I didn't want to be supervised. I said, "I know. I wanted to be respected." "I know that too." We made an agreement there in the little kitchen. Claire would not treat me like a child because I had made one terrible mistake. I would not hide serious decisions because I was frightened of embarrassment. She would ask questions without assuming. I would answer them without hearing judgment before it had been spoken. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. No one made a speech. She reached across the table, and I took her hand. That was enough. On Christmas morning, I placed Peter's photograph on the cottage windowsill. For years, I had believed that wanting another companion would somehow diminish what Peter and I had shared. Daniel had used that guilt to make himself appear generous, but the lie did not make the truth less important. I had wanted to love again. There was no shame in that. Being deceived did not mean I was foolish forever. It did not mean every kind word was false, or that companionship after 60 belonged only to other people. Daniel Whitmore never existed. But the woman he nearly destroyed did. She was lonely, proud, careful with money, and careless with hope. She was desperate to believe her life had not already finished. For a long time, I despised her. That Christmas, standing beside Peter's photograph, while my grandchildren argued over a board game behind me, I finally stopped. I understood why she had answered the first message, why she believed the excuses, why she protected a stranger from the daughter who loved her. Understanding did not erase what happened. It allowed me to forgive myself for surviving it. Lauder. We walked to the water. The sea was gray and restless, and the wind pushed tears from my eyes before I felt sad enough to cry. Claire linked her arm through mine. Ahead of us, the children ran towards the harbor wall. I touched the green scarf at my throat and thought about the suitcase that had once waited beside my front door, somewhere. Even then, another person might have been packing for a journey, buying a present, printing tickets, waiting for a promise to become real. And as I looked out across the Cornish sea, I found myself wondering, how many people are still sitting beside a packed suitcase, waiting for someone who was never coming?